Welcome! In this series, I have already talked about the key players who established the first colonial empires. However, besides Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, France, and England, others also attempted to expand and create their own colonies, and although they could not rival these great powers, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Scotland also participated in the process of colonization. This episode is dedicated to their efforts. The initial steps were taken by Norwegian explorers who reached Iceland in the late 9th century. 100 years later, Erik the Red, who was banished from there for manslaughter, explored the southwestern coast of a new land, which he named Greenland in order to attract more settlers. Two main settlements were established there, with fewer than 3,000 inhabitants overall. In 985, while sailing to Greenland with a larger immigration fleet, a merchant was blown westwards by strong winds and sighted land after a few days. He described his course to Erik's son, Leif Erikson, who explored the area around 1000 AD, spending 2 winters in what is now Newfoundland. Their settlements did not become permanent though, likely due to hostile natives who soon forced the Norse to retreat. On Greenland, the two main locations remained settled well into the 14th century, but then declined. By that time, they had their own bishop, and in 1261, they accepted the overlordship of the Norwegian king. The western settlement was abandoned around 1350, its eastern counterpart followed in the 15th century. Among the likely causes, the plague in Europe, the Little Ice Age, and cheaper ivory from Africa are mentioned. In 1397, Norway and Denmark entered into a personal union with Sweden. After Sweden gained independence, the kings of Denmark-Norway maintained their claim to Greenland. Expeditions were sent there in the 1600s, but they all failed, mainly due to inexperience, so whaling remained the only activity in the region. Soon after, in 1620, the first colony was established in India at Tranquebar, Tarangambadi, where a fort was built. 3 trading stations followed in modern-day Ghana, near Accra, Fort Christiansborg, Cape Coast, and Fort Karlsborg, as the Danes became involved in the gold, ivory, and slave trade, using their large navy and merchant fleet. Plantations were established at a 4th location, Fort Frederiksborg, but they soon failed, while Karlsborg was sold to Sweden and Cape Coast was taken by the English. The Danish Africa Company was incorporated into the Danish West India Company in 1671, signaling a change in focus. St. Thomas, one of the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean Sea, was settled in 1668. The company soon became known as the West India Guinea Company. They relied on their own fleet of ships, and while initially they had financial difficulties, raising taxes increased their revenue. 2 more islands were added. St. John was purchased from France in 1718, followed by St. Croix in 1733. Sugar plantations were the main source of income. Together, these islands formed the Danish West Indies. A Danish expedition reached Greenland in 1721. No European survivors were found. The 2 settlements were gone. During the 18th century, more forts were built on the Gold Coast. These lasted much longer. Christiansborg was still there. Fort Fredensborg was added in 1734, with 3 more, Augustaborg, Prinsenstein, and Kongenstein, in the 1780s. All of them were sold to the British in 1850. This marked the end of Danish presence in the area. In India, Serampore became the second local center in 1755, near Calcutta, where a university was also established, but both territories were sold to the British in 1845, so only the small Nicobar Islands remained under Danish rule until 1868. The West India Guinea Company flourished until the 1750s, relying on the Atlantic trade, selling slaves in the West Indies for molasses and rum, but then the government took over. The company was revived in 1765, but was liquidated 11 years later. In Europe, Norway was ceded to Sweden towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1814. The slave trade was abolished in 1803. Slavery itself followed in 1848, but by that time, the Caribbean colonies had a predominantly British and Dutch European population. An economic downturn followed, the population declined. The USA finally purchased these islands in 1917. Greenland remained the only significant territory. It became important during the Cold War, with a US airbase. It was incorporated into Denmark in 1953, implementing the same constitution. Sweden gained independence in the 1520s, ending the Kalmar Union with Denmark and Norway. In the next 150 years, an empire was built, taking over Finland, parts of Norway, the Baltic states, and some northern German regions. The first colony was established in North America, along the Delaware Valley, in 1638. Fort Christiana was the first settlement, relying on the Company of New Sweden that had been founded by the Dutch William Usselinx, who was granted a monopoly on tobacco by the Crown. Within a few years, around 600 settlers arrived. They were tolerated for now by the Dutch, who were militarily weak. More forts were built, but when the Second Northern War broke out in Europe, New Sweden was taken by a Dutch force in 1655, only to be conquered by the English 9 years later. In the meantime, the Swedish Africa Company was founded in 1648, after which a treaty was made with the Akan king of Futu, who sold some land and made it possible to settle the Gold Coast in the 1650s. Fort Karlsborg was built first, followed by others, but the appointment of the governor made the company's founder to defect and returned with a Danish ship. The first fort was lost. Subsequent conflicts with Denmark and the Netherlands resulted in the complete loss of the area. Swedish claims were officially relinquished in 1667. A long break came next, during which Sweden focused on European expansion and the conflict with Russia. In 1709, a defeat at Poltava marked the downfall of the Swedish Empire, but this did not prevent further attempts at colonization. A new venture on the island of Tobacco failed in 1733 due to hostile natives. Saint Bartholomew was given to Sweden by France with a population of 750. The slave trade and American exports provided significant profits, taking advantage of the British-American War of 1812. In the meantime, Guadeloupe came into Swedish possession in 1814, but it was returned to France a year later. No other colonies were established in the region. After several failed attempts in the 17th century, mainly in Gothenburg, the Swedish East India Company was founded in 1731 to trade with India and China, relying on British and Dutch traders who were shut out from the companies in their own countries. The first expedition sailed to Bengal and Canton, but the route was dangerous. Ships were lost to the sea and to fiercely competitive European rivals. A fort was established in India at Parangi-Betai, but it was destroyed by French and British forces a month later. Tea and rice showed up for the first time in Swedish households, but silk, furniture, porcelain, and other luxury items were also important. After a few decades, profits declined due to new rules regarding the import of tea to England. The company then went bankrupt in 1811. Saint Bartholomew remained the only Swedish possession, but as slavery was abolished, the island's economy declined, the population suffered from drought, so it was eventually given back to France in 1877. The last player we should mention was Scotland, where King James VI sent Sir William Alexander to the New World in the 1620s. 4 expeditions failed. Nova Scotia was finally settled in 1629, but skilled emigrants had to be incentivized with money to participate, which remained a problem. Even though New France was soon conquered in the Anglo-French War, it was returned. While Nova Scotia was abandoned, it was reoccupied by the French, who named it Acadia. In the 1680s, East Jersey was settled by Scottish Quakers and Covenanters. followed by Episcopalians and Presbyterians in the 1720s. By that time, the two Jerseys were merged and became a royal colony. Also in the 1680s, Stewartstown was founded in Carolina with 150 Scottish settlers, but it was wiped out by the Spanish 2 years later. In 1695, the Scottish Darien Company was founded. 2,500 settlers were sent to Panama, where inexperience, malaria, a lack of provisions, and the Spanish presence sealed their fate. 4 years later, when a Spanish force arrived to wipe out the Scots, most of them had already succumbed to disease and hunger. After this failure, only one attempt was made in 1735, when Scottish settlers arrived in Georgia to establish the town of Darien. Despite frequent conflicts with the Spanish, it survived, although more settlers were sent there to replace losses, and slavery had to be adopted as not enough labor was available to make the settlement profitable. Obviously, none of these countries managed to build a vast colonial empire. They lacked the population and the economic power to compete with the great powers of the time. With this episode, the overview of the initial period is now complete. I will talk about the slave trade and its significance in the next video. Until then, see you around!